Hello and welcome. My name is Andy Solkeld and this is my UKTC mission pack review. Today we're going to be talking about mission 1-3, Data Scry-salvage, and this will be round 2, day 1 at a UKTC event. So Data Scry is a 6 objective mission, hold 2, hold 3, hold more. It has sticky objectives in no man's land. Which basically means if you hold an objective in your command phase with OBSEC, then you can move off it and still count as holding it. This is very important for kind of later in the game, later in this video when we'll be talking about kind of things you can do to make this easier. It comes with a mission action, which is do an action on the objective in your kind of home deployment zone. When there's no enemy units on it, it completes at the end of the turn and you score 1 victory point for each no man's land objective that you control at the end of the turn, up to a maximum of 3. So what this means is you want to have something relatively cheap and that doesn't do anything else, doesn't give out auras, etc., that can do the data scry action. So as assisters players, I use my 1 unit of 2 Crusaders to do this action every turn. It's 22 points, and that's absolutely fine. It just sits there and does that the entire game. This mission also heavily favours going first with forward deploying OBSEC. Because of the sticky objectives, if you have a forward deploying unit that can sit on an objective in your first command phase, you can then walk off it and not have to worry about it again, unless your opponent has deep strikes, etc. So what that means is if you can go first and position onto the objectives, you have taken the initiative and your opponent kind of has to push back to stop you stickying them. If you have any form of, say, a durable OBSEC or forward deploying, like Death Guard Terminators or anything like that, you can quickly get onto an objective. That's one of the best ways that you can sticky it early and then kind of keep with the plan of moving forwards. Now, the way this mission normally plays out is it turns into kind of a hammer and anvil game. So what happens is people go up their half of the board. So rather than kind of spreading widthways, they go lengthways, they go widthways upwards. And most games end up with people holding 3 objectives for 8 every turn. But what it does mean is denying your opponent any one objective immediately denies them 4 points on it. So, and if you can deny them 2 somehow, you can zero them on primary, particularly if one of them is their home objective. If you can take their home objective, then they can't start the data scry action. So what that means is you take 2 objectives and the data scry, which is potentially, it would potentially be 10 victory point swing if you can pull that off. It's a challenging thing to do, but if you can, using various OBSEC shenanigans or fast movement, deep striking, anything like that, it's a very good play to kind of push further into the lead. The UKTC maps have incredibly open diagonal firing lanes in this layout. From either of the far objectives that have no ruins around them, those small walls are just dense. Dense cover, so basically shooting through them is -1 to hit, but they don't grant a cover save and there's no obscuring or line of sight blocking. So they are incredibly open and prone to getting shot. Similarly, the 4 ruins in the middle have windows in them, so as soon as you touch into them, you can see through that ruin completely, which opens it up even further. This is particularly dangerous if you're neatly staged in your ruin, preventing them charging you through the wall, etc. But then they touch in from the side with shooting and then just shoot everything inside there. So watch out for that. It's often more advantageous to push forward so that you can try to land a combat punch before they can shoot through the wall at you. This mission is it's very tough, but at the same point, it's very fair. I did the maths on this. You cannot line up turn 1 charges. If you are deployed on the line and your opponent is deployed on the line, you are 24.7 inches away from each other, I believe, assuming my trigonometry is correct. Which means you can't do like double 6 charges. The only way you could do this is with using advance and charge Repentia, and then giving them an additional sacred right, or choosing the sacred right where they get +1 advance, +1 charge. Or similarly with Zephyrim, who would move 12. No, you couldn't even do it with those because you would be outside of 12 inches. So you'd have to do it with Repentia. They get +1 to advance, so they move 13 inches forward, which would, using a 6, which would then get you within 12 inches, because you'd be 11.7 away, and then you'd use 2 6s on your charges, or 3d6, discard the lowest, to then be able to make it. So it's very unlikely you're going to get turn 1 charges on this. So how do I typically play this as a Sororitas player? So what I often do is I will start my Retributors at the back in the big L, and I will slowly walk them forward throughout the game, eventually touching one of the two middle L's on my side. I will also use Carry Forth the Faithful, almost guaranteed on this, where I will move my Rhino, which will either have 2 units of Battle Sisters or a unit of Novitiates, onto the objective to start with. And what I try to do is I try to set up my Rhino in a way where I can get it onto that objective, and then I can have, if I've put 2 units of Battle Sisters out, one of them could get out on the objective that I've taken, which is the top left one, and the other one could disembark onto the other one, 9 inches, because 3 inches plus 6, and then they could both raise banners on those 2 objectives, as well as raising on my home field. And I'll explain my secondary choices later. I will also try to set up some Zephyrim or some Seraphim to be able to move 12 inches onto the middle, the kind of second objective along the diagonal going downwards, as a kind of backup to raise a banner there. The reason I like doing this, and the reason I like taking banners in general on this mission, is you can raise 3 banners turn 1 with a bit of forethought, which in turn can then score you 15 points. It also plays into the passive secondary game of Sisters, which is basically, I want you to come to me. The next main thing I will do here is I will set my Repentia up in the lower of my 2 Ls, kind of on the deployment line, because you can get some very, very nice early charges with them into one of the middle ruins if you're going second, or they can kind of advance up from the bottom ruin to the top ruin to enable them to then strike the 2 objectives there. This is how I've played it. If your opponent is deploying much more heavily towards your end, or towards the 2 objectives you're thinking, you may want to set the Repentia up to be able to come closer. But it will depend on the matchup there. I'm just reading my thing. Yep. What I like to do, I like tagging the objectives, using Repentia and Zephyrim as obsec missiles to deny your opponent's secondaries and primary on this is very useful. So when I have my Repentia in my bottom ruin, I will almost always try to have the Dogmata with them to grant them obsec, give them war hymn, give them an additional sacred right, and then just send them onto that near objective and just try to murder everything that's there every turn, because it denies 4 victory points, and just push that. If I can hold my top 2 objectives whilst denying them 1, then I'm kind of in a happy position here. And then what I will try to set up later in the game is where if I feel I've made sufficient headway in trading, I will try to set up Zephyrim that will go onto their home objective at the same time as doing an OBSEC missile, and just try to kill and take 2, deny them about 10 victory points, and just push it forward there. I don't like taking kill secondaries on this. You'll see at the bottom that my kind of leaning on this is defend the shrine, leap of faith, and then probably banners, or sacred ground. I know a lot of people like taking sacred ground on this one because there's 3 objectives you can get to, 4 objectives potentially, so it could be an easy 15 on it, a likely 11, but I'm a much more passive player than many, and I like taking banners because it really plays into the sisters' game plan of please come towards me. I think against a similar army, so say in a mirror, I would not take banners. I would potentially take sacred there, because then it's very much it largely comes down to who's going first, who's going second at that point. But banners kind of baits your opponent towards you, and that's exactly what sisters want. So I just try to give them sufficient reasons to walk towards me so that I can then kind of capitalize with Zephyrim, Repentia, Retributors, like shooting and repeatedly and so on. So that's broadly my overview of this. It can be very bloody, particularly with the 2 far objectives. So the 2 objectives in the corners where there's no cover, there's only dense. Those are the ones you want to tag with OBSEC as quickly as you can, because if you can't, because once you've tagged them with OBSEC, all you need to do is screen out deep strikes. So what I will typically do at that point is tag them with OBSEC, move further down, sit a Castigator or a Rhino on it just to make sure that no one can deep strike on top of it, and so on. Just because it pushes people further back and things like that. That's broadly my overview. You can see how I've kind of lined up to have my Repentia to move. There is an argument where you could try to turn this to a Dawn of War mission. I've just never seen it done successfully. Sisters do not move fast enough to be able to get from the kind of bottom ruin in the deployment zone over onto those 2 objectives. And because it's so common to go hammer and anvil, trying to go Dawn of War could just end up in a huge fight over 2 objectives. Saying that could work very much in our favour, given we potentially have more assets than they do. So that's something you could consider against, say, a low model count army, like, say, Custodes or something like that. This, as I said at the beginning, this map heavily favours forward deploying OBSEC. So if your opponent has access to it, it can lead to uphill battles. It's particularly hard against Chaos and Imperial Knights because they can walk one of their armigers onto it, tag it, walk off, and because they move so fast and they shoot and fight, they can just kind of they can just move it, and then it's very hard for you to get back to them. But anyway, that's been my review of Data Scry-salvage. I hope you've enjoyed it, and in the next video we're going to be moving on to look at Mission 3 on day 1. Thank you very much.